I don't know if you've ever been in a really stressful situation. There seemed to be no end to it. I kind of went through that this week. Shannon went to a pastor's wife's conference, and so I've had all 5 kids, and I feel a little bit persecuted, a little bit. No, it's just insane, you know. I mean, like, there's 5 of them, and there's just one of me, and I mean, I think that I'd have trouble just watching Xander by myself, and then I got all these kids just running all different directions, and I don't know how many times I raised my voice. I'm ashamed to admit that I probably did more than I wanted to. But, you know, I know that there's an end to it, you know, and I know that Shannon's coming home tonight. I'm so excited, woohoo, to see her face, and she's going to relieve me from the burden I've been under with all 5 kids. But, you know, it's really one of those things, you know, where, you know, we go through these stages in life, and I can feel my blood pressure is a little higher than normal. You know, you can, you know, you feel that. You just kind of like, it's like have a hard time sleeping, all that. Anyway, so I'm so excited for her to be back tonight. And I see the end to my dilemma. And yet in our text today, we're going to see a situation that is just super, super, super stressful for those people who are involved. And I think probably on both sides, on Joseph's side, but more so on his brother's side, because they just seem to be in the most dire straits and not realizing that God's hand, well, maybe because they think God's hand's in it, but not realizing that God's hand is in this whole thing to deliver them, but not just them, but the whole world. And so as we've been looking at the life of Joseph, remember that it started out with him having these crazy dreams. And right on the heels of him, you know, telling on his brothers, which wasn't too popular amongst his brothers. He told on them, but then he had these dreams about the sheaves of wheat. The 11 sheaves bowed down to his sheaf, and his brothers were angry with him because, are we going to bow down to you? Remember, they were kind of frustrated. This younger brother, favored child, he was given a special coat by his dad because he was kind of the favorite child, the son of his old age, and also the firstborn of his favorite wife, Rachel. And so this whole thing was kind of brewing with Joseph until one day he came out to the field to find his brothers. He went to Shechem. Remember, they weren't in Shechem, and a man told him, hey, they're over in Dothan. And so he walked over to Dothan, and finding his brothers there, and them seeing him come away, they say, hey, let's do away with this dreamer. Let's do him in. And so they devised a plot to kill him, and then grabbing him, you know, Reuben, of course, convincing him, let's throw him into this pit. They threw him into the pit. And then remember that the caravan came by and Reuben was thinking, I'll deliver him later out of their hands. But then a caravan came by of Midianite slave traders, and Judah said, hey, let's sell him. Why should his blood be on our hands? Why don't we make a profit and be rid of him at the same time? And, you know, human trafficking was a big deal in those days. So they sell Joseph off to the Midianites, who sell him down into Egypt to Potiphar, the captain of the guard, where he becomes a slave. And of course, God exalts him and works in his life, and he's risen to the top of the household. And Potiphar didn't even know it was in his house because it was in Joseph's hands, and he trusted Joseph with everything until until Potiphar's wife, of course, cast longing eyes on Joseph and wanted him to lie with her. And of course, that ended Joseph in jail as she accused him of rape and all that. And then being in the jail, of course, Joseph being there, rotting in jail. And who knows how long. We figure about 13 years from the time he was sold into slavery until he got out of jail. And so he was in jail for a long period of time when the butler and the chief baker came and he interpreted their dreams. And of course, to the baker, the cupbearer, the butler, he said, you know, this is a good dream. 3 days you're going to be let out of prison, and remember me. Remember, he said that. Remember me when you get back to Pharaoh. And then, of course, the baker says 3 days they're going to kill you. You know, you're going to be put to death. And so the chief butler, again, 3 days later, was restored to his position. The chief baker executed just as Joseph said. And the chief butler forgot, remember? Totally forgot his promise to Joseph. And 2 whole years go by before the Pharaoh finally has this dream. And he has this troubling dream of a famine that's going to come. and then, 7 years of plenty that are going to come, and then 7 years of famine. Of course, he doesn't know that that's what it is until Joseph comes and interprets it for him, and he puts Joseph second in the land over all of Egypt. Now, last time we saw Joseph's brothers coming to him. They're coming to Egypt because their dad said, hey, why are you guys looking at each other? Why don't you get up? And I hear there's bread in Egypt, grain in Egypt. Go and buy some. And so they go to buy some, and Joseph sees them not recognizing him. And, of course, remember that they came, asked for bread, and he claimed that they were spies. And he said, who are you? What's your family? He says, we have a father, and we have a younger brother. We're 10 of 12 brothers. One is no more, and the other one is with our father. And he says, no, you are spies. And until you bring your brother back to me, you send one of your brothers to go get your other brother and bring him back to me so I know that you're telling the truth. And they said, hey, you can't do that, and ends up that he takes Simeon, of course, probably the one who recommended that he be killed, puts Simeon in jail, and the other brothers go back home and tell their father, here's the dilemma. This man, this lord over the land there, he says if we don't bring back Benjamin with us, he's going to, he's not going to give us grain. And Simeon's in jail, and he's like, now, I've lost Joseph, now I've lost Simeon, now you want to take Benjamin, all things are against me. He was just completely upset about it. And he says, you want to take away all my children. And of course, because of that, Jacob delayed in letting them go back to Joseph. Now, it's come a long time, and remember, he says, if you take Benjamin, bring my gray hairs down to the grave in sorrow, kind of a dramatic way of saying, this would just kill me if you took my youngest son. But some time has passed, and the grain that they got from Egypt is running out, and Joseph knows that 7 years of famine total, and so far only 2 years have gone by of this famine, and so he knows, I'm going to see these men again. They're going to go back with the grain I gave them, which is only going to last them a little while, and they'll be back. And so he's just kind of waiting and biding his time. And it says in verse 1 of chapter 43, sorry, I forgot to tell you where we were, Genesis 43, and verse 1, it says, now the famine was severe in the land, and it came to pass when they had eaten up the grain, which they had bought from Egypt, that their father said, go back and buy a little food. And so, I don't know, it doesn't tell us how long poor Simeon has sat in jail, where they're eating their food. But, they would have gone directly back, and that's kind of what they said. Hey, we could have gone back and gone and come back by now. But Jacob was not going to let Benjamin go with them. And so he's just kind of holding out. And this shows Joseph has some serious patience with this whole thing. You think about this. It's surprising to me, and no doubt by the Holy Spirit, that Joseph, when he was appointed as the Grand Vizier over Egypt, the second in command, that he wouldn't have just left and gone to see his father, or taken an army and gone to kill his brothers. It takes some serious patience. And yet you kind of sense through this whole thing that Joseph is just waiting on the Lord. And I love that, because the Bible tells us that those who wait on the Lord renew their strength. And when we wait for God, and it's so easy to be impatient. We live in a world where it's like everything right now, and we want everything to happen instantly, and we want everything, yesterday. And yet, when it comes to Christianity and when it comes to following Jesus, God is very, very patient. And things do not happen overnight with God most of the time. Every once in a while we have one of those prayers where we pray and God answers instantly. But how many of you guys have been praying for something for years? Decades? Yeah. That's how it is sometimes. And so here's Joseph now in Egypt for 20 years. And we get the sense through this whole time that he's been there that he has been patient with the Lord. That he believed the Lord has blessed him. No matter if he was a slave, no matter if he was a prisoner, Joseph has been patient with the Lord, and he's been waiting on the Lord for these things for a very, very long time. And God is working the whole time while Joseph is a slave, while Joseph is a prisoner, God is working. And Joseph understands that. He understands that, it seems. And so what's a few more months? What's a few more years even maybe? As he's waiting for his brothers to return to find out how this whole thing's going to play out. So he's very, very patient. Verse 3, it says, "But Judah spoke to him," to Jacob, saying, "The man," that's what they call Joseph, this whole thing, the man. That's where we get that term, the man. The man's sticking it to me. They keep saying that about Joseph. "The man solemnly warned us, saying, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we will go down to buy food.'" So, Jacob, you're the holdup. You're the one who's holding this whole train up. I mean, yeah, we're going to all starve to death sitting here in Egypt, in Canaan, but unless we go down to Egypt with Benjamin, nothing's going to happen. It's something about the Benjamins, right? If only he knew. Verse 5, it says, "But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.'" Now, I want you to notice a switch here. All through chapter 42, it talked about Jacob, remember? It talked about Jacob, and all things are against me, and you're going to bring my gray hairs down to the grave in sorrow, and all that. And here, in Genesis chapter 43, in verse 6, it says, "And Israel." Now, we always see this throughout the Old Testament as we look at Jacob's life. Of course, it was Jacob this and Jacob that. Jacob the heel catcher, the one who grabbed his brother's heel on the way out of the womb, the one who deceived his brother, the one who he's just a trickster through the whole thing until that day when he wrestled with God and God put his hip out of joint and he changed his name from Jacob, which was kind of in a sense him in the flesh, to Israel, which is him in the spirit. And we always see that throughout this narrative as we see Jacob's life, that when he is acting out as the old Jacob, the old deceiver, the old hill catcher, it calls him Jacob. But when he's acting in faith, it's good for us to see that, because then we can say, oh, okay, his faith has been revived in God. And so it calls him Israel. So it says, "And Israel said, 'Why did you deal so wrongfully with me as to tell the man whether you still had another brother?' But they said, 'The man asked us pointedly about ourselves and our family, saying, "Is your father still alive? Have you another brother?" And we told him according to these words.' Could we possibly have known that he would say, 'Bring your brother down'?" He's like, "Why would you tell him why are you showing all your cards?" And they're like, he asked us. We didn't think that he'd, do that. How would we know, And so, such a stressful situation, here they are. They're going to starve, or they're going to bring their brother, and their dad's holding out, and but it says, verse 8, "Then Judah said to Israel, his father, 'Send the lad with me.'" Now, I want you to remember what Reuben had proposed before. Remember, Reuben's the oldest, and he's all, we'll send Benjamin with me. We'll go. If they kill him, if he dies, you can kill my 2 sons. You can kill your grandsons. Like that's going to help anything. I mean, isn't that the most ridiculous proposal ever given? And so, Jacob, of course, is not even listening. But now Judah says, "Send the lad with me, and I will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I myself will be surety for him. From my hand you will require it. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. For if we had not lingered, surely by now we could have returned this second time." So however long it would take them by foot to travel through the wilderness of Midian, around, maybe get passage to cross the Red Sea, onto the Sinai Peninsula, and then or to mainland Egypt, and to go all the way to Egypt. Who knows how long that would take by foot in those days? A couple of men traveling, they actually could probably get there in a week and a half. But, that's going fast. And so usually when you're traveling, you carry your donkeys and your servants and everything else. And if you have anybody with you, it's going to take you some time, maybe a month or 2. to make that journey. And so they're, saying, hey, it's been a while. We could have been there and been back already. So just all be a surety. And Judah, the one who wanted to sell him in Genesis chapter 37, verse 26, is now stepping up and taking responsibility. Now, this is on the other side, you have to remember, of chapter 38, which was rated R, right? Remember, we saw, Judah going off to his friend's house, marrying the Canaanite woman. His son, God kills his first son because he's evil, kills his second son because he refuses to give Tamar a son. And then, of course, Tamar, seeing that he's not going to give her his third son, Shelah, she takes it upon herself, plays the prostitute, sleeps with Judah, and then he finds out. And it was at that point, when he finds out that Tamar had played the harlot and she's pregnant, and he commands her to be killed, remember, she came out and said, hey, the guy whose signet ring and staff this is, that's who I'm pregnant by. And he realized he was busted because it was his, right? And it was, for some reason at that point, he realized, God is just and God is going to work these things out. And he'd been running from God. He'd been hiding from God. He probably felt very guilty about his brother Joseph and being a part of that, offering to sell him off. But something flipped. Some switch flipped in Judah, and he started turning towards the Lord himself. And we're going to see that really as Judah steps up here. He's taking the responsibility, and the consequences of his own sin are finally weighing upon him. And so he gives us a little timeline. You could have gone there, could have returned by now. So probably a few months had passed. Verse 11, and their father Israel said to them, if it must be so, then do this. Take some of the best fruits of the land in your vessels and carry them down as a present for the man, a little balm, a little honey, spices, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Now, this is an interesting list because this is very similar to what the Midianites were carrying down to Egypt when they bought Joseph and sold him into Egypt. And so this is a very, in a sense, kind of a reminder to them. Then he says, take double money in your hand, and take back in your hand the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Now, I don't know about you, but have you ever noticed that when you try to skirt the system, when you try to cheat the system, that it can end up costing you a lot more in the long run? And that's kind of what they're seeing here. They're feeling the sense that their sin has found them out and that they've been busted. God is busting them. God is holding them accountable. Got to fix that, sorry. God is holding them accountable. But now the 20 pieces of silver they got for Joseph is a small thing compared to all the money they're pouring into this thing to try to just get some food so they don't die. And no doubt they're feeling that God is judging them. And so he says, take back in your hand the money that was returned in the mouth of the sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Verse 13, take your brother also and arise and go back to the man. And this is why it calls him Israel in this point. It says, and may God Almighty give you mercy before the man, the El Shaddai, that's what he's saying. Give you mercy before the man, that he may release your brother and Benjamin, and if I am bereaved, I am bereaved. And why is this? Why is it showing that Israel is acting in faith at this point? You notice he's not, it's going to bring my gray hairs down to the grave, Instead, he's more like Esther here. You notice, remember the story of Esther when Mordecai tells her, go before the king, and she says, he could have me executed, and he's like, you have to go or everybody's going to be executed, and she says, okay, I'll go, and if I perish, I perish. And sometimes we have to lay ourselves upon the mercies of God and say, okay, God, I don't get it. I don't see how this is going to work out, but I'm just going to step forward in faith, and I'm going to allow you to allow the consequences to work out in my life. And I think that that's an important lesson that we all have to go through at times in our lives. That we have the right way to do things, we have the wrong way to do things, and sometimes our hand is forced, and we see that it's just going to be horrible if we step forward, and yet God is always there with us. He tells us, I'll never leave you or forsake you. I'm with you till the end of the age. His right hand upholdeth us. And sometimes we go through trials, and yet, if we do it by faith, and this is what we should learn from Joseph, is that there is a way to go through things that's not by faith, where our life comes apart at the seams and everything goes wrong, and why God, shake our hand at the heavens and our fist at the heavens and scream at God and go through that trial, or we can choose to say, okay, God, you know what? I trust you. I believe you. I know that you have me, even though I can't see it, even though I don't understand it. And that's really where Jacob's at now. And we probably wouldn't know it if it didn't say Israel, but because it tells us it's calling him Israel at this point, we know that he's looking to God. And he's basically throwing himself on the mercy of God and saying, God, I don't want to lose another son. My heart's broken over Joseph. I'm concerned for Simeon. Is he already dead? And now Benjamin, his second favorite child, or his next favorite child, is being put on the chopping block. And he says, if I'm bereaved, I'm bereaved. So the men took the present and Benjamin and took double money in their hand, in verse 15, and rose and went down to Egypt, and they stood before Joseph, and Joseph saw Benjamin with them, or when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, take these men to my home and slaughter an animal and make ready. These men will dine with me at noon. And it would be a huge honor for them to dine with the Grand Vizier, but you'll notice that they're not told that that's what's happening. And that's a really key part of this section, that they're just brought to, and maybe they're told, we're taking you to the Grand Vizier's home, but they're not told you're going to eat. You're going to dine with him. He's going to celebrate or something with you. And so it says, verse 17, then the man did as Joseph ordered, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house. Now the men were afraid because they were brought to Joseph's house, and they said, it is because of the money which was returned in our sacks for the first time that we were brought in, so that he may have cause against us and seize us, to take us as slaves with our donkeys. With their donkeys too. They're really concerned because a lot of these Egyptian houses they found through excavation actually had cellars or dungeons. These aristocratic houses had dungeons in the basement. And so they're thinking, we're going to be brought in, they're going to arrest us, they're going to throw us in the dungeon or make us into slaves. And that's why they're being brought to the house, because we're going to be his household slaves now. And so this whole thing's super stressful. Could you imagine what this would feel like? You're in a foreign country, you've been talked to harshly, you're now brought to the house, your brother's in prison, now you have Benjamin with you, and dad's stressed out. These guys, their blood pressure has to be through the roof. I'm thinking about how stressed out I was, and mostly it's just been keep the house clean so we don't, so when mom comes home, it's not trash. That's been most of my stress, I think. It's like, don't put that away. You guys pick up your clothes, it's like just doing through that whole thing. But these guys are just super stressed out, and they're like, are we going to die? Are we going to live? Is this guy going to, who knows? But they think they're being brought there to be made personal slaves. That's kind of ironic if you think about it, because that's exactly what they sold Joseph into. And when they drew near to the steward of the house, they talked with him at the door of the house and said, oh, sir, we indeed came down the first time to buy food, but it happened when we came to the encampment that we opened our sacks, and there each man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight, so we have brought it back in our hand. Okay, so they're like, okay, we need to preempt this and tell them, hey, we brought the money back. And we have brought down another money in our hands to buy food. We do not know who put the money in our sacks. Now, this is a test. Remember the first time he sent them away, he put the money in their sacks to see with that extra money if they would even come back. Or if they just forget about Simeon. Because, hey, we just got some money. Remember, they sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver. Now this is a lot more money than that. Are they just going to, not say anything about it? Are they greedy for money? And now they've brought Benjamin back, and they've even brought the money back. It says, verse 22, and we have brought down the other money in our hands to buy food. We do not know who put the money in our sacks. But he said, verse 23, peace be to you. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money. Then Simeon, and then he brought Simeon out to them. So this is an interesting thing. He says, your God, and he's not talking about an Egyptian God, and he's not using the term for your gods. He's using the term for the God of Israel. He says, your God and your father's God. Now that has to be super convicting to them. Here's this guy who's saying, no, God has performed a miracle for you. Now, I don't think that this man is thinking, or trying to deceive them in that, miraculously the money showed up. But he's being serious because he knows that what his master has done is a miracle for them. Your money's been given, that money's been given to you. And so you need to thank God for it. And this is something that God is slowly working in their lives to draw them out and to bring them back and to hold them accountable. And he's using Joseph to do that. But Joseph is he's very serious about this because he doesn't want them to be, he wants to see if they're the same guys who sold him 20 years earlier, or if they've had a change of heart. Verse 24, so the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water and washed their feet and gave their donkeys feed. And then they made a present ready for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they would eat bread there. So they just find out that we're going to eat today here in the house. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house and bowed down before the earth. Now this is super significant right here. Because last time when the 10 brothers came and bowed down before him, it wasn't the fulfillment to the prophecy, and I'm sure that Joseph remembered that. The 11 sheaves of wheat bowed down to his sheaf of wheat. And now when these brothers came the first time, it was 10 of them. Benjamin was not with them. This time, all 11 are there, and so this was the beginning of the fulfillment of that prophecy. And so very significant to Joseph, as now he sees all 11 brothers there, all of them bowing down to him. And so he knows that God is finally, can you imagine waiting 20 years for something that God has promised to come about? I mean, that's how long, and it wasn't an easy thing to wait for, I mean, this is through all the time in jail, all the time as a slave, all the time. I wonder how God is going to work this out. And yet, have you ever had something happen to you where you just knew it was going to work out? I had that happen to me years and years ago. There was a young gal, actually there was a young guy who came to me and he was asking me, how do you know when the right person is the right person and everything? And Jesse and I were kind of talking to him. We kind of shared, this is how I felt that Shannon was the right one for me. And he said, this is how I knew Kathy was the right one for me. And he left. And I looked at Jesse and I said, he's going to marry this other gal. And Jesse looks at me, he's like, you're crazy. That's the same thing Kathy said. And I said, I don't know how I know that. I just know it. And so then, time went on, and they made later, like probably about 5 months later, they made their intentions known that they liked each other, which I was shocked even to hear that, but because it just didn't seem like a likely couple to me. And so I waited, and I was like, okay. And then they broke up with each other. They weren't really dating, really. They were kind of courting for a little while, and then it was kind of a bad deal. And so then they started dating other people. And Jesse said, I guess we were wrong. And I was like, no. It'll be interesting to see how God works it out. But I know I'm not wrong. I know God. I don't know how I know. I just know. And sure enough, time went on, and things happened, and then Mike and Lindsay got married. And it was just like, how in the world? It's the most unlikely couple in the world, And yet God told me. And, honestly, and some of you know the whole story and some of you don't, but if I wouldn't have had God tell me that, I probably wouldn't have done the wedding. I probably wouldn't have never done that wedding. But God had to tell me that because he knew he wanted me to support it when it came down. It's just one of those things. And so, too, with Joseph here, he's under this situation where, he's waiting on the Lord, and he wants to see if everything's falling into place. Are these guys really changed? And now this prophecy's been fulfilled. And there has to be some sort of satisfaction with that. To know I wasn't crazy all those years. Now we know that he believed it because he interpreted other people's dreams. And he was confident in the interpretation. This is from the Lord. And because it happened twice, he told the Pharaoh, it is sure. And Joseph's dream happened twice. Remember, it was the 11 sheaves of wheat, and then it was the 11 stars and the sun and the moon. And so he knows the first prophecy's been interpreted. Because it happened twice, it is sure. It's going to happen. He told Pharaoh. And so too for him. And he knows that now, not just my 11 brothers now, but next is going to be my dad and Leah and the 11 brothers are all going to come back, and they're going to bow down again together. And so there has to be such an overwhelming fulfillment and satisfaction to this moment. And yet still not sure where his brothers are at. Verse 27, then he asked them about their well-being and said, is your father well? The old man of whom you spoke, is he still alive? And they answered, your servant, our father, is in good health. He is still alive. And they bowed down their heads and prostrated themselves. And so again, they bowed before him. Verse 29, and he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son. Remember, this is Rachel's only other child. He was Rachel's first. Benjamin, she died giving birth to him, and said, is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me? And he said, God be gracious to you, my son. So he pronounces a blessing upon him. And this blessing is the same as the priestly blessing that the priests are to give, in Leviticus to the congregation. God bless you and keep you. May God be gracious unto you and give you peace. And this is the same construct in the Hebrew. It's the only other place we find that. But could you imagine how now this felt? To see this brother. Last time he saw Benjamin, he was between 2 and 5 years old. He was a teenager at the time, but Benjamin was just a little guy. And all these years of, missing this little brother of his that was probably the closest sibling to him. And now he sees him again as a man. This guy's, in his 20s or maybe even 30 years old. And he sees him for the first time. It's got to be staggering. Verse 30, it says, now his heart yearned for his brother. So Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to weep. And he went into his chamber and wept there. And so very, very emotional about this. And I can't imagine what this will be like. First of all, his 10 brothers come. And you have to know that his heart was like sinking, seeing the 10 brothers come without Benjamin. I mean, could you imagine just all the things? Have you ever had those moments where just all the horrible things that could possibly ever happen go through your mind? Maybe your spouse or your children are driving somewhere, and you're waiting for the call to say, hey, we got here okay, and they're taking longer than you expected, and you're like, oh, what happened? And you're like looking on the news, and you're seeing if there's some wreck or something like that, and you stress out. That's how he had to feel when he saw his 10 brothers come without Benjamin. What did they do to him? Where's my little brother? Did they kill him too? They even said that he was the son of his father's old age. Benjamin, in so many ways, took Joseph's place as the favorite son. Not that that's right, but that's what he did. And so, Joseph had to be apprehensive. Is my brother really alive? And until he saw the whites of his eyes, he had no idea. Verse 31, then he washed his face, so he had to put his mascara back on. Egyptians, they wore that, eyeliner or whatever. He washed his face and came out, and he restrained himself and said, serve the bread. So they set him a place by himself and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat food with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. And so they called them the Haburai, and the Haburai were shepherds. The Egyptians were very civilized, and this is something we probably don't realize, but in the Egyptian museum, they find these cylinders with carbon rods in them, and they believed that they were probably batteries that they used to light some sort of light that they had. And we're not sure exactly, but they were super civilized. They still don't know how they got light down into these pyramids, in some of these inner chambers and stuff. There's no soot on the outside walls. They didn't have fire in there. And so how did they light that? And of course, you've probably seen, they had these, mirrors that they shot light back and forth across the mirrors down into there. But they've tried to replicate that, and they've never been able to get the light into there. And yet these things are carved out so perfectly that through the middle of the Great Pyramid, there's a corridor that goes all the way through, and it's only off a quarter of an inch from one side to the other. And the architecture that put these things together is so precise that the way that the stones are keyed together on the pyramids is tighter than the tiles on the space shuttle. It's precise like nothing we could do today. They found an onyx cap that had been somehow engraved to perfect specifications, and we don't have the ability to carve that these days. I mean, it's just the things that we found in ancient Egypt are beyond our imagination. And yet they had, in just highly civilized, agriculture and penned animals, and they had their ways of doing things. And so somebody who would wander out in the field with the sheep was considered a very unclean person to the Egyptians, an abomination, and so they would never sit with them. I mean, think about it. I had a friend who he had a guy that was hiring him to basically clean out outhouses in the campsites around Idaho, southeast Idaho. And so he's driving this slosh truck, and going and sucking out the stuff inside the outhouses. And this is way back. The guy is a lot older than me. He's probably, I would say, probably in his 60s now, maybe 70s, early 70s. But anyway, he said that he was driving along one time and he saw a hippie walking along the road, and he picked up the hippie, and the hippie's sitting there in the truck with him, and he's driving, and he says he shook his glove off, and he reached in his lunchbox and grabbed a sandwich and took a bite, and the hippie said, "Pull over, man, I can't ride with you." Some people are just, below your standards of what you feel is clean, so sometimes I feel that way about my kids. You need to go wash your hands, don't hug me anymore, this type of thing, But the Hebrews were an abomination to Egyptians. So Joseph's sitting by himself, probably at a table, his servants sitting at another table, and then the Hebrews sitting at another table. So that this interesting thing happening. Verse 33, and they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked in astonishment at one another. And he took servings to them before him, but Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank and were merry with him. And so, really interesting, they seat these guys according to birth order. Now, if you had no idea and you couldn't tell who's older or younger, which I'm sure there was a little bit of that, you could probably see, okay, this guy's obviously the oldest or whatever. If they were all the same, it would be like 40 million to 1 is the chance that you'd get to put them all 11 of them in order. Of course, then you have, some of the factors, like obviously Benjamin's younger than Simeon and so on and so forth. But to get them all in order was it was miraculous if somebody didn't know. But Joseph had them set up. And so there's clues. He's dropping them hints, if you will. But they see this, and then he does something very interesting. He gives Benjamin 5 times as much. Now, what we know about Egyptian culture is that 5 times as much was always served to a visiting king. If it was royalty that was visiting in Egypt, they would give them a 5-time portion. And so they're treating Benjamin like royalty, and his purpose in that isn't, I love my brother so much I want to give him the most. It's how is everyone else going to act when I treat Benjamin like a king? Because in a lot of ways, that's how his father, in his youth, and not because of him, because of his father, but his father treated him like royalty within the house, and it was because of that that they despised him. And now he wants to see if they feel slighted, or if they give him the stink eye for getting 5 times as much. And so all these things that Joseph is doing are tests. We're going to start into chapter 44. And he commanded the steward of his house, saying, "Fill these men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack." Again, same thing that happened last time. "Also put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, and his grain money." So he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. So one more trick up his sleeve. And this may seem redundant, but he just wants to see their reaction to all these things, because this will be the final test, but this is going to really show him, are they willing to put themselves out there if Benjamin's in trouble? And that's kind of the idea. Verse 3, "As soon as the morning dawned, the men were sent away, they and their donkeys, and they had gone out. And when they had gone out of the city and were not yet far off, Joseph said to the stewards, 'Get up, follow the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, why have you repaid evil for good? Is not this the one from which my Lord drinks, in which he indeed practices silver divination? You have done evil in so doing.' And he overtook them, and he spoke to them these same words." And so plants the money back in their sacks again, plants the silver cup in Benjamin's sack, chases them down, says, "Hey, you've stolen something from my master." Verse 7, "And they said to him, 'Why does my Lord say these words? Far be it from us that your servants should do such a thing. Look, we brought back to you from the land of Canaan the money which we found in the mouth of our sacks. How then could we steal silver and gold from your Lord's house? With whomever your servants is found, let him die, and we also will become your Lord's slave.'" Now, you would think, after last time finding money in their sacks, that they wouldn't be so hasty to throw themselves out there like that, right? I mean, obviously they don't know what's in the sack, just like they didn't last time. And yet they put themselves to this strong scrutiny. Verse 10, it says, and he said, "Now also let it be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be a slave, and you shall be blameless." Then each man speedily let down his sack to the ground, and each opened his sack. And so the servant of the house, they said, "Let the man die, and the rest of us will be slaves." He said, "Let it be according to your word, but we'll make him a slave, and the rest of you will go free." And that's what the servant said. And so he takes they're a lot more harsh on themselves than he is. So he searched. He began with the oldest and left off with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. And you had to imagine that as they saw him open up the sacks and there's the money, they had to be going, "Oh no." And they go through each one, and there's the money, and there's the money, and there's the money, and they're feeling pretty good because he's going from the, the steward is building this up. He could have just gone to Benjamin's sack first, but he goes through every single one until he finally gets to the last one, and they think, okay, we're going to be all right, and then he pulls the cup out, and it says, and this is the reaction he was looking for, "They tore their clothes, and each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city." Now, this is really what needed to happen, because these guys could have said, "You know what? He's the thief. Take him." And they could have gone back home. And they would have been blameless. I mean, that's the thing. Now, of course, not blameless before their father. When they get home, there's going to be some trouble. But they could have said, "You know what? Dad can visit Benjamin in jail," right? Or whatever. It's such a stressful thing. They tear their clothes. And remember the last time when they came home and Simeon was in jail, and they said, "Hey, Simeon's in jail." Who tore their clothes? Not the brothers. It was Jacob who tore his clothes. This time they all tear their clothes, which is a sign of distress in Hebrew culture. Verse 14, "So Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, And he was still there, and they fell before him on the ground. Notice again the fulfillment of prophecy. Last time they bowed themselves before him, then they bow themselves again. This time they fall flat on their faces. They throw themselves before him on the ground. Verse 15, and Joseph said to them, what deed is this you have done? Did you not know that such a man as I can certainly practice divination? Now, I don't think that Joseph was practicing divination, which is what the Egyptians did, but he was in the position of power, and so he was still playing the ruse that he was an Egyptian. And it says, then Judah said, what shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? Notice this line here. God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Here we are, my Lord's slaves, both we and he, also with whom the cup was found. So Joseph, notice it's not Reuben. Reuben's the oldest brother, right? Simeon's the next oldest. Levi's the third oldest. Judah is the fourth oldest. But remember, Reuben went up to his father's couch and shamed himself. He slept with Bilhah, his father's handmaid. And then Simeon and Levi, when they had made a deal with the men of Shechem, they committed treachery and killed them after they'd circumcised themselves. And again, committed treachery and kind of disqualified themselves. And so Judah would be the one to whom the birthright would fall. Judah was responsible for him being sold into Egypt. And now Judah is taking, in this whole section, Judah is taking responsibility for the whole thing. And he says, our sins found us out. But he said, verse 17, be it far from me that I should do so. The man in whom the hand of the cup was found, he shall be my slave. And as for you, go in peace to your father. So still testing him. Are they going to say, okay, good, take him and leave? Are they going to abandon their spoiled little brother? Because that's what Benjamin was. He was his father's favorite. He wouldn't let him go the first time. And now they want to see if they take off and leave him behind for silver again. Verse 18, then Judah came near to him and said, my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's hearing, and do not let your anger burn against your servant, for you are even like Pharaoh. And his utmost respect he's giving to Joseph here. Verse 19, my Lord asked his servant, saying, have you a father or a brother? And we said to my Lord, we have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, who is young. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. So he admits Benjamin is in the same position Joseph was in, and he just owns that. And he's still alive, and that says something. Verse 21, then you said to your servants, bring him down to me, that I may set my eyes on him. And we said to my Lord, the lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. But you said to your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall see my face no more. So it was, when we went up to your servant my father, that we told him the words of my Lord. So pretty big revelation happening here as he's hearing all of this. In verse 25, and our father said, go back and buy us a little food. But we said, we cannot go down, for our youngest brother is with us. If our younger brother is with us, then we will go down, for we may not see the man's face unless our younger brother is with us. Then your servant my father said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons, and one went out from me, and he said, surely he is torn to pieces. This is the first time Joseph is hearing this. This is what he finds out, that his father believes he was torn to pieces. And I have not seen him since. But if you take this one also from me, and calamity befalls him, you shall bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. Now therefore, when I come to your servant, my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will happen when he sees that the lad is not with us, that he will die. So your servant will bring down the gray hair of your servant, our father, with sorrow to the grave. And so Judah takes full responsibility, takes the guilt upon himself. Notice what he does next. For your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father forever. Now, therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my lord, and let the lad go up to his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad is not with me, lest perhaps I see the evil that will come upon my father? So Judah here makes himself a substitutionary sacrifice for his brother who is guilty or found guilty, so that he might please his father. Isn't that interesting? And Judah will be the heir to the Messiah. You ever heard that before? Sound familiar? You know, in a sense, Judah becomes that side. He's sacrificing himself. He says, take me, make me a slave, don't take this son. A very different Judah than says, let's sell him to the Midianites, right? And this is exactly what Joseph is looking for. This is the final test passed. Judah taking full responsibility. And so let's just look at a couple verses in chapter 45. Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, make everyone go out from me. So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. Could you imagine being in that room? What that would be like. Here you are, you're stressed out, they're going to kill Benjamin, they're going to take Judah, Dad's going to be mad. You know, and these men are between 60 and 25 years old. These are old guys. You know, it's not like, but this has got to be the most stressful time of their entire life. And then he takes off his makeup. I don't know what he does. Whatever. He says, it's me, Joseph. They had to have wet their pants. I mean, that had to have been the biggest revelation, the biggest shock of their entire life, that the man is their brother this whole time. And he makes himself known to his brothers and wept aloud, and the Egyptians of the house of Pharaoh heard it. So the whole palace is hearing him weeping as he's telling his brothers this, and they're probably just like, what in the world is going on? And notice this, Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Does my father still live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence, no doubt. And Joseph said to his brothers, please come near to me. So they came near, and this is where he's going to cut their heads off. And then he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. They're having cognitive dissonance. And that is that state of mind that you cannot believe what you're seeing is real. You know, and I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but something your mind cannot compute it. You know, here's this guy, he's an exalted ruler, he's second to Pharaoh. He's Joseph? No, that's not true. Because remember Joseph, we sold him as a slave. You know, they just can't compute it. And Joseph said to his brothers, please come. Oh, wait, I already read that. I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt, verse 5. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves. That's an interesting line. Because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. And remember that in Psalm 105, where it says, God called for a famine in the land, so he sent a man, Joseph. They hurt his feet with fetters. They put him in prison, and yet, you know, God would exalt him. God put Joseph there for the sole and express purpose, and Joseph understood this by now, to save the world alive. And what a trial to get there. You know, 20 years in Egypt, 20 years away from his brothers, 20 years away from his father, and now all the things that were prophesied, all the things that he waited for are now coming to pass. It doesn't make you feel so bad that you've been waiting for a while for stuff, does it? You know, God is working. And I think that that's what we can take away from this as we look at this chapter, is that God is working in our lives. And the key, you know, of course, we remember it says in Romans chapter, was it 14, I think? No, 15. 14. Romans chapter 14, without faith, or it says, without faith, you know, anything that's done without faith is sin. And of course, Hebrews chapter 11, 11 verse 6, where it says, without faith it's impossible to please God. For we must believe that God exists and that he is the rewarder of those who diligently seek him. You know, God desires for us more than anything to trust him. And when we trust him, when we have it, you realize that's the only thing that made Jesus marvel? Jesus marveled when people had faith. You know, and usually it was like, Jesus marveled and says, I've not found faith this great in all of Israel. Because it was usually a Gentile, right? It was a Syrophoenician woman, and it was a centurion who believed Jesus could do it more than any of the Israelites. And yet when he was in his hometown, he says he couldn't do many great, wonderful works there because they did not believe, because of their unbelief. You know, in order to live that life that's solid and firmly planted, it takes us to believe that God has our back, that he is working through these things, that he is going to bring us through, and that it's all part of his plan. As a Christian, nothing can happen to you, nothing can touch you in this life outside of God allowing it to happen. And so if we follow him and trust him and seek him along the path, along the journey, when things are good or when things are bad, when we're, you know, being led by the still waters and green pastures, and he's preparing a table before us in the presence of our enemies, or whether we're going through the valley of the shadow of death. No matter where we are, God is with us. His right hand upholdeth us. He strengthens us when we're weak. He gives us grace for the rough times and for the trials. And yet we still seek him when things are going good. That's what God desires. And really, when it comes to faith, what the core of that is and what the purpose of that is it not just that we, okay, God, I trust you, but God, I love you, and I know you love me. And because you love me, and because I've seen your love in my life, I will trust you. Because that's what God desires from us, as much as faith is that we love him, and that we trust him. Let's pray.